Today's story is about a martial artist named Michael who fled to the United States and went into hiding in various southern states after killing his wife. However, members of the Chinese community in Georgia eventually captured him. On September 14, 2007, a middle-aged man and a young girl entered a travel agency in Melbourne, Australia. The middle-aged man appeared to be of Asian descent, in his 50s or 60s, while the young girl seemed to be around 3 years old. He informed the travel agency staff that he wanted to go to the United States immediately. However, all flights to the US were fully booked, and the staff informed him that tickets were sold out. Upon hearing this, he became extremely anxious and restless. Suddenly, he walked towards a wall where a map was hanging and pointed to different locations on the map, asking questions one by one. The travel agency staff noticed that he was randomly choosing destinations, which seemed strange. At that moment, a Chinese staff member appeared and had a conversation with him. Eventually, he purchased a flight ticket for Los Angeles, scheduled for the next day, September 15, at 10:45 a.m. He also mentioned that he would be going to South Africa for business after arriving in LA. Meanwhile, the young girl had remained silent throughout, staring into the distance. On the morning of September 15, the middle-aged man appeared at Southern Cross Station with the young girl. Southern Cross Station was a major transportation hub in Melbourne, with direct access to the airport. He took the escalator with the girl and, at that moment, quickly disappeared, leaving the girl behind. Shortly after, an elderly couple discovered the girl standing motionless under the escalator. They immediately called the staff and reported the incident to the police. However, the police could not obtain any information about the girl's parents from her. She remained silent, and despite examining her body, there were no signs of abuse. The police suspected that the girl had been abandoned. Through CCTV footage, the police were able to identify the girl and the middle-aged man walking with their travel bags. However, the man's face was not visible. Through investigation and questioning, the identity of the middle-aged man was confirmed. He was a 53-year-old Chinese man named Naiyin Xue, also known as Michael, and the girl was identified as his daughter, Qian Sun Xue, also known as Claire. Father and daughter had arrived in Melbourne from New Zealand on the evening of September 13, 2007, and stayed at a hotel in the city for 2 nights. On the morning of September 15, at around 8 a.m., Michael left Southern Cross Station, leaving his daughter Claire behind, and fled to the United States alone. Australian police confirmed the identity of Claire's mother, Ainan Liu, also known as Annie, who resided in New Zealand. The Australian police informed the New Zealand police about the situation, and they immediately headed to Annie's residence. However, the house was empty, and outside the house, they found Michael's car parked. On September 18, the police obtained search warrants for Michael's house and car, and the next day, at around 1 p.m., they discovered Annie's body in the trunk of the car. Annie was wearing a yellow necktie around her neck, and it was determined that the necktie belonged to Michael. Michael became the suspect, and on September 20, the police issued an arrest warrant for him and handed him over to the U.S. Interpol. Michael was born in 1954. He was born in Liaoning Province, China. When he was 8 years old, he started learning martial arts following his cousin. That's when he began his martial arts training. Since then, Michael had been practicing martial arts from a young age and became skilled at it. At the age of 28, he started training in Tai Chi, and when he was 39 years old, he was elected as the president of the Tai Chi Association in Liaoning Province. Afterwards, he appeared on TV and published his own book, promoting Tai Chi. In 1996, Michael went to New Zealand to teach Tai Chi. After staying in New Zealand for 3 years, he began a global tour to promote Tai Chi. In 2002, Michael settled in Auckland and obtained New Zealand residency. He originally had a wife from China, but after he came to New Zealand, his marriage fell apart. His first marriage daughter, Grace, who immigrated to New Zealand with him, also revealed that she couldn't bear her father's abuse and had run away at one point. In September 2002, the same year Grace ran away, Michael met Annie. At that time, Michael was struggling to make a living through a Chinese furniture business, as he had no remarkable achievements. Annie was born in 1979 in Hunan City, China, and she and Grace, Michael's daughter, were almost the same age. In April 2002, Annie left for New Zealand for studying abroad. She initially learned English at a language institute, but she couldn't overcome the language barrier and ended up losing all her money while applying for a visa extension due to being scammed by a broker. Eventually, Annie dropped out of school and worked part-time to sustain her life. One day, she saw an advertisement where Michael was looking for a tenant, so she moved into his house as a monthly renter. A few months later, Annie became pregnant with Michael's child. In July 2003, they got married, and their daughter Claire was born. Some people claim that Annie met Michael when her life was at rock bottom, and she ended up marrying him because he cared for her attentively. However, some people argued that Annie married Michael to obtain New Zealand residency. In early 2006, after Annie obtained residency, Michael began exerting physical violence against her. People said that their marriage was relatively happy until the birth of their daughter in 2004. However, after the birth of their daughter, he became extremely aggressive and violent towards Annie, due to their child being a girl. Annie had been living in constant fear of her husband since their daughter's birth. In September 2006, Michael threatened Annie with a weapon. As a result, Annie stayed at a women's shelter in Auckland for a month and applied for a protection order against her husband. Eventually, Michael was arrested, but Annie later withdrew her complaint. After withdrawing the complaint, in November 2006, she returned to her hometown in China with her daughter. In March 2007, Annie returned to New Zealand, and she lived with Michael again. In June 2007, the domestic violence by Michael resumed, but this time the charges couldn't be proven, and he was released. Eventually, she left him and moved to Wellington with her daughter. Afterward, Michael found out about his wife's residence and went to confront her with an axe. Fortunately, when the landlord raised a gun and warned him, Michael fled the scene. However, after the incident occurred, the police discovered that Annie had registered on a dating site and found out the truth. She introduced herself as unmarried and it was also found on her blog. However, in September, Annie left Wellington and returned to Michael's house in Auckland. According to the memory of the Wellington landlord, she told him that the most dangerous place for her was the safest place. Michael and Annie reconciled for the sake of their child, but Michael was suspicious of his wife was involved in an affair. On September 12, Michael went to the police station. When he was arrested on charges of assaulting his wife, his passport was confiscated by the police. He asked the police to return his passport, and told the police that his relationship with his wife had been restored. The next day, on September 13, Michael left New Zealand with his daughter and arrived in Melbourne, Australia, and on September 15, he abandoned his daughter at Southern Cross Station in Melbourne. He boarded a flight to Los Angeles later that day. On September 18, the police discovered Annie's body in the trunk of the car, and on September 20, New Zealand police forwarded an arrest warrant to Interpol in the United States. Interpol promptly issued a red notice, and the FBI offered their assistance. Michael appeared on the popular television show America's Most Wanted. Subsequently, he was seen in Houston, Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama. In February 2008, about 5 months into his escape, Michael was spotted in a small town in Georgia, USA. At the time, he was in a desperate financial situation, so he had visited a local Chinese job placement agency. The agency staff arranged for him to stay with a Chinese restaurant cook. On February 28, 2008, a group of 6 individuals residing in an apartment in Georgia recognized Michael from a photograph published in the Chinese language press. They attempted to inform the police but encountered difficulties in communicating their message. Out of frustration, they took matters into their own hands and apprehended him. They removed his pants and used them to tie his legs together. They also used his belt to bind his hands behind his back until the arrival of the police, who then arrested him. At first, he denied being Michael, but when the police found his driver's license, he couldn't deny it anymore. He was deported to New Zealand. On March 10, 2008, the trial began in Auckland, but he claimed innocence. However, if he was innocent, there was no reason for him to flee abroad, and strong evidence of a yellow necktie remained. On June 20, 2009, he was finally sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum non-parole period of 12 years. He maintained his innocence until the end and cried out that he was unjustly treated. With the help of the Chinese embassy, Annie's mother arrived in New Zealand. Her mother finally reunited with her granddaughter. Her stepsister Grace also expressed her intention to adopt Claire. On October 4, the Auckland Family Court granted custody of Claire to her grandmother. So, Claire and her grandmother returned to China with Annie's remains. At the time, Grace had raised $27,000 as a donation through website for Claire, but her grandmother refused the money. After that, her grandmother tried to hide this incident from Claire, but later Claire read all the articles about her mother on the internet and knew the truth. Afterward, Michael wrote a book claiming he was not the killer and held an exhibition where he expressed his grievances through drawings. On March 22, 2020, after his parole application was denied, he finally admitted for the first time that he was guilty of killing his wife.